This is the extraordinary tale of how an ordinary man became an overnight billionaire. Our story begins in the humble town of St. Albans, England, where Graham Hornigold, a talented chef, had built a comfortable life for himself despite a childhood marked by instability and loss. Graham's journey to success was not an easy one. Born on November 26, 1974, in Germany, his early life was marked by instability. His father, a sapper in the Royal Engineers, was stationed at a British military base in Munster. When Graham was just 2 years old, his parents separated and he was placed in foster care. After 2 years, he moved to St. Albans, England, a town 24 miles north of London, to live with his father and stepmother. He never knew his biological mother. His father offered only the terse explanation that she had left the family. Despite these early hardships, Graham's resilience shone through. At 14, he began working Saturdays stacking bread at a St. Albans bakery. The owners, recognizing his potential, sponsored his enrollment in catering college, launching a successful career that saw him become a renowned pastry chef, gracing the kitchens of upscale restaurants like the Ritz and the Lanesborough. This professional ascent occurred against a backdrop of profound personal hardship. His relationship with his father had fractured years prior, with Graham citing mistreatment during his childhood. They'd had no contact since Graham was 18. Then on December 30, 2006, devastating news arrived. His brother Simon, driving a Subaru Legacy, then in July 2020, everything changed. Graham received an email from a woman named Dion claiming to be his biological mother. Initially skeptical, he grilled her with questions to verify her identity. Dion passed, confirming obscure details like his birth certificate listing Teresa H. Houghton Hornold as his mother and his German birthplace. She explained her absence with a heartbreaking revelation, stating that Graham had been forcibly taken from her at birth. Having recently flown from Bangkok to Liverpool, Dion orchestrated a meeting with Graham and Heather in the city. At their meeting, Dion unveiled a tragic and urgent reason for her sudden reappearance. She had been diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor and bone marrow cancer, with doctors giving her only months to live. This dire prognosis prompted her to finally reveal a stunning truth. She was the illegitimate daughter of Brunei's former sultan, a tiny Southeast Asian nation famous for its incredibly wealthy royal family. Beyond her royal lineage, Dion revealed a staggering personal fortune, amassed from ventures like palm oil plantations and fruit farms, which she stated was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Her proposition was clear. With her time running out, she wanted to transfer this immense wealth to Graham, her long-lost son. Upon learning of his mother's terminal illness, Graham was torn. While he couldn't shake off a feeling that this sudden wealth would change things between them, he was eager to meet her and get to know her. Despite his internal conflict, Graham reached out to his mother, expressing his willingness to meet her and acknowledging the emotional complexities of their newfound relationship. Overjoyed by her son's acceptance, Dion wasted no time in making plans. She soon moved to London, settling into the opulent Dorchester Hotel, a 5-star establishment where, according to Graham, she seemed to know every employee. It was clear that Dion had a long history with luxury. From the moment they met, it was evident that Dion had a deep affection for her son. She wasted no time in showering him with expensive gifts, including designer clothing, shoes, and bags. She also insisted on buying him a car. However, amidst this whirlwind of newfound wealth and the revelation of her royal lineage, Dion's health took a downturn. She was readmitted to the hospital for emergency surgery, leaving Graham and Heather by her side, providing unwavering support. As Graham cared for his mother, he grappled with complex emotions. On one hand, he was forming a deep bond with her, but he was also cautious about her motives given her terminal illness and the sudden influx of wealth. Despite these internal struggles, Graham was determined to cherish the time he had with his mother, knowing that it was precious and uncertain how much more time they had together. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. One day in 2019, Graham went to visit a Rolls-Royce dealership in Mayfair, London. There, he talked to a salesperson about buying a new car. As they discussed, the salesperson casually mentioned that a familiar face had popped in earlier. Who would that be? Well, none other than Dion, Graham's biological mother, whom he hadn't seen in 14 years. And apparently she had just bought the Phantoms from the showroom, spending upwards of £500,000 each. That's a pretty hefty sum for anyone, let alone someone Graham thought was living paycheck to paycheck. His initial surprise quickly turned to suspicion. Was his mother secretly rolling in dough? If so, where did all that money come from? And if not, how could she afford such a lavish purchase? Just a few weeks later, Graham was at a Land Rover dealership finalizing the purchase of a 2021 Range Rover for his partner, Heather. As he signed the papers, his eyes caught a familiar name on the sales order form. Sure enough, it was Dion's. See, she had bought a Range Rover from the same dealer, too. She was clearly doing quite well financially. Now, despite Graham's lingering suspicions, he decided not to pry further. After all, it wasn't his place to ask questions about his mother's sudden wealth. Plus, she had always been a bit of an enigma, even during the brief period he knew her years ago. There was more to the story, much more, and Graham didn't know it yet, but he would soon find out just how much more. It was September 2020. Dion had just given birth to her youngest child. It was a boy, and according to her, she was dying of cancer. Now, Graham was skeptical about the whole dying part, but he was worried nonetheless. So he rushed to his mother's side to offer support. However, it soon became apparent that something wasn't right. Dion's condition seemed to worsen rapidly, and within a few days, Graham noticed she was barely eating or drinking. He urged her to seek medical attention, but she refused, claiming she was already under hospice care. Concerned for his mother's well-being, Graham asked if he could move in and care for her, and she agreed. Soon, Heather, Graham's partner, and his son also moved in. They hoped to provide Dion with the support and care she needed during this difficult time. As the days passed, Graham watched helplessly as his mother's condition took a turn for the worse. She grew weaker, losing appetite and becoming increasingly frail. He knew she wasn't dying from cancer. Whatever she had was taking a significant toll on her body. Still, Dion insisted she was fine. All she needed was some fresh air, she said, as she often complained about the London smog. So Graham booked a flight to Zurich, Switzerland, where they stayed in a 5-star hotel. Dion spent thousands on rooms and meals. Throughout their stay, she met with lawyers and bankers discussing complicated financial matters. Each meeting brought her closer to death, she claimed, as these processes drained her energy. And that's when Dion dropped a bombshell. She revealed she had an enormous inheritance for Graham, but accessing it was proving difficult due to its global nature. The inheritance included a substantial amount in a Swiss bank account in Graham's name. Dion said she'd handle all the arrangements so Graham wouldn't have to worry. She claimed it was a massive fortune, but getting it into his hands was a long process. That's because she had to work with various entities from around the world to bring it all together. For Graham, it was a lot to take in, but he trusted his mother. Surely she wouldn't deceive him. Dion continued to tell grim tales of her supposed wealth, including owning vast oil fields in Angola and gold mines in South Africa. She spoke of a vast fortune left by an ex-husband, a billionaire from the Middle East. These stories were wild, to say the least, but Graham found himself believing them. On November 2020, Dion convinced Graham to fly to Zurich with her. There they finalized paperwork for the inheritance and opened the Swiss bank account. Dion had arranged for everything to be ready, including private jet travel. Staying in a suite at the 5-star Bourg-au-Lac hotel, their trip to Zurich was nothing short of extravagant. Dion spent thousands on expensive dinners, wine, and shopping, as if trying to make up for lost time. She reveled in the finer things in life, from caviar to champagne, and Graham watched in awe. But amidst the opulence, Graham couldn't shake off a nagging feeling. Something about his mother's elaborate stories just didn't sit right with him. Still, he pushed those doubts aside, choosing to focus on the positive. Perhaps his financial struggles were about to end. Maybe his son could have a better life. Just as Graham started to feel hope, Dion dropped another bombshell. She informed him that she was dying and might not make it through the night. This news hit him hard. He felt a mix of sadness and anger towards the situation. But mostly, he was confused by his mother's sudden turn of events. With Dion's health seemingly deteriorating, Graham found himself torn between his desire to believe in his mother's love and care and the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Would this massive inheritance really come his way, or was he being played once again? Meanwhile, back in London, Heather had her suspicions about Dion. Heather had done her homework. Using a private investigator, she found out that Dion had multiple aliases and had been married 3 times. Additionally, Dion's age seemed to vary depending on who she was talking to. At different times, Dion told Heather that she was either born in 1951 or 1960. Furthermore, her paternal name changed from Cornelius to Colin. Finally, Dion claimed to be related to Brunei royalty. However, officials in Brunei confirmed she had no royal ties. Additionally, Dion had been convicted of shoplifting in the United Kingdom in 1980 and obtaining property by deception in 1982. Although Heather was troubled by these findings, she chose not to confront Dion directly. Instead, she focused on supporting Graham and their son. But little did she know that Dion's web of deceit was about to tighten its grip on their lives. In January 2021, Heather decided to return to New Zealand with their son to visit her family. Before leaving, she had a heart-to-heart with Graham, expressing her concerns about his mother. She encouraged him to be cautious and not let Dion manipulate him further. Despite her worries, Graham understood his bond with Dion ran deep. He believed his mother genuinely loved him and wanted the best for him. However, upon returning to London, Graham found himself drawn back into Dion's web of deceit. Dion had accompanied Graham on his trip to Zurich, where she charmed everyone around her with her charisma and generosity. But now she was back in London and eager to spend time with her son. She invited Graham to her hotel room, where she regressed to her old ways of extravagance. She ordered in large quantities of food and drink, insisting that Graham eat and enjoy himself. Over the next few days, Graham found himself torn between his feelings for his mother and his partner. He missed Heather and his son, but he also couldn't shake off the feeling that he needed to be there for Dion. She appeared weak and vulnerable, and he couldn't bear the thought of her passing away without him by her side. Meanwhile, back in Zurich, Dion continued to live a lavish lifestyle, staying in a luxurious hotel and spending lavishly on meals and drinks. She had told Graham that she was too ill to move into his home, but in reality, she was enjoying the finer things in life with money she didn't have. She claimed to have a massive inheritance for Graham, but it seemed she was living it up with borrowed funds. Despite the distance, Heather kept tabs on Dion's activities and noticed concerning patterns. For instance, she learned that Dion was in regular contact with a man named Juan, who had also been scammed by Dion. Through careful sleuthing, Heather discovered that Dion had taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from Juan with promises of investing it and giving him a cut of the profits. But naturally, she never did. Heather couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She knew Dion was a skilled manipulator and feared she was turning Graham against her. As time went on, Dion's behavior only grew more erratic and manipulative. She started using Graham's credit card for expensive purchases, racking up huge bills. Graham was initially hesitant to confront her, but Heather's advice finally convinced him to take action. He confronted Dion, demanding an explanation for the charges. Dion, however, dismissed his concerns, claiming she had the money to pay off the debt. She promised to repay him in full, but never did. Instead, she continued to live a lavish lifestyle, leaving Graham in a precarious position. Despite the mounting pressure, Graham remained hopeful that his mother would eventually come through with the promised inheritance. He clung to the belief that she loved him and wanted to provide for his future. But, as months passed, it became clear that the inheritance was nothing but a figment of Dian's imagination. Graham found himself trapped in a web of lies and deceit, struggling to free himself from his mother's clutches. The truth was far from what he had hoped for, and he was just beginning to realize the extent of his mother's deception. As Graham struggled with his mother's lies, he began to notice inconsistencies in her stories. He recalled instances where Dion contradicted herself, providing different details about her past and present. For example, she would change the year of her birth depending on the conversation. At times, she claimed to be fluent in 18 languages, which seemed highly unlikely. Graham started questioning the validity of his mother's claims, but he hesitated to confront her directly. After all, she was his mother, and he wanted to believe the best about her. Despite the growing doubts, Graham found himself drawn into Dian's world of deception. He continued to lend her money, believing that she would eventually repay him. However, as the debts piled up, Graham's financial situation grew dire. He started missing credit card payments, and his phone line was disconnected due to non-payment. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Graham knew he had to take action. With heavy heart, he decided to sever ties with his mother. He confronted Dion, accusing her of lying and exploiting him. Dion reacted with anger, accusing Graham of being ungrateful and uncaring towards her well-being. She claimed that she needed the money to sustain herself and that Graham had a moral obligation to support her. However, Graham remained steadfast in his decision. He told his mother that he would no longer tolerate her deceit and manipulation. He cut off contact with her, refusing to lend her any more money. As Graham moved on from his mother's clutches, he started taking steps to repair his damaged credit and rebuild his life. He reached out to his partner, Heather, seeking support and understanding. Upon hearing Graham's story, Heather felt a mix of sympathy and anger towards Dion. She knew that Graham had been through a lot and she was determined to help him recover from the ordeal. Together, they worked on piecing together the fragments of Graham's life. Meanwhile, Dion found herself in a precarious situation. Cut off from Graham's funds, she was forced to rely on her wits and charm to survive. She started reaching out to old contacts, seeking financial assistance. However, many of her previous lenders had already fallen victim to her scams and were wary of lending her money again. Desperate for cash, Dion resorted to borrowing from loan sharks. She took out payday loans at exorbitant interest rates and pawned her possessions to raise funds. As her debts mounted, Dion became increasingly desperate. She tried to contact Graham, pleading for another chance, but he remained resolute in his decision to cut ties with her. With no other options left, Dion was forced to flee to Malaysia, where she believed she could start anew. However, her past had a way of catching up with her, and as she settled in Malaysia, Dion found herself entangled in a new web of deceit and manipulation. She used her knowledge of foreign customs and cultures to con unsuspecting victims. She targeted wealthy businessmen, posing as a successful entrepreneur and investor. She lured them into investing in fictitious projects promising high returns, but never delivered. As the years went by, Dion continued to evade authorities, changing her identity and location to avoid prosecution. She lived a life of luxury, preying on the vulnerabilities of others. Despite her success in evading justice, Dion's conscience started to catch up with her. In rare moments of honesty,